The history of X-Men in video games is interesting, to say the least, with a crazy amount of ups and downs when it came to their quality. From the dreadful NES title to the amazing arcade game to the brilliant Mutant Apocalypse for the Super Nintendo. X-Men games are like a box of chocolates and you never know what you're gonna get. So keeping this in mind, what would be brought to the table when Sega themselves would publish an X-Men game for their 16-bit platform at the height of their console war with Nintendo? Let's find out as we take a trip back through time to look at a video game that was simply titled X-Men. Let's analyse this superhero themed adventure, identify its place in history, but just as importantly, talk about the stupid secret it contains, which is amongst the dumbest in all of gaming history. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is Sega's X-Men. Yeah! The X-Men have waxed and waned in popularity over the half a century plus that they have been part of the Marvel Comics universe. Originally crafted in 1963 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the heroes were designed to be mutants as a quick catch-all origin for dozens of new characters. Spider-Man had to be bitten by a radioactive spider, Captain America needed the Super Soldier Serum, and the Fantastic Four were bombarded by cosmic radiation. Coming up with new origin stories for every single character, the Marvel creators wanted to introduce became a tall task, and creating the all-purpose mutants gave a common origin to each new debutant. Essentially, these characters were granted with the X gene, a mutation that activates around puberty and gives the teenager a variety of superpowers, aspects that were not meant for mere mortals. Fast forwarding past the genesis of these beloved characters, 30 years on, Western Technologies Incorporated would develop a game published by Sega for their Sega Genesis platform. Releasing an X-Men game for the hardware made perfect sense, as in 1993 the X-Men had a renewed visibility in the eyes of society, due to the success of the Fox Kids animated series. When we consider how mainstream Sega's 16-bit offering was at the time, X-Men for the Genesis, or Megadrive in most places, was a perfect combination. Aside from just the waves that the animated series was making, artist Jim Lee, who would eventually become the publisher and chief creative officer for rival DC Comics, and the legendary writer Chris Claremont relaunched the comic book series in 1991 with X-Men Issue 1, which would go down to be the best-selling comic book of all time, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, selling around 8 million copies. So X-Men's presence was at an all-time high. Riding this wave of success, Sega would get the license and publish this title. But one further question that deserves answering is, how did it tie in with other X-Men bits of media of the period? Well, the answer to such a question is the Danger Room, so let's discuss that in more detail. Basically, in the canon of the X-Men, much like that of the Star Trek franchise that Patrick Stewart and another Dr. McCoy starred in, there is a room meant for training purposes that uses high technology holography to provide challenges. On the Enterprise it's known as the Holodeck, and many characters find it to be a place of rest and relaxation, or potentially training for future work tasks. In the Marvel Universe, the X-Men explore the Danger Room. This was once a simple gym with specialised equipment in early appearances, but it later evolved into a holographic battle simulator. Theoretically, it could be used for recuperation after a hard-fought battle, but at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, it is dedicated to providing mutants a place where they can hone their abilities in service of the greater good. This means the Homo Superior are constantly fighting against simulations of the Brotherhood of Mutants, usually led by Magneto, the Holocaust survivor who is an on-again, off-again friend of Professor Xavier. Oh, friend! In this Sega-led adventure, the Danger Room has gone off the rails thanks to a virus, while 4 of the mutants are training inside. With the safeties disabled, these mutants will fight through the fictionalised worlds the room provides. Playable characters include the Raging Cajun Gambit, the Berserker barraging Wolverine, the German teleporter Nightcrawler, and the stalwart Boy Scout Cyclops. These are all available to play in this adventure, and allies like Storm, Rogue, Iceman and Archangel will make appearances as non-playable characters too. Before we progress further, I just want to give a quick thank you to all the mutants at home who watch this channel. Hitting that subscribe button now helps me get YouTube to suggest this content to a wider audience, and the more people that watch these, the more retro Marvel game videos I'll make. So subscribe now if you don't want to miss my upcoming video on X-Men 2 Clone Wars. I love you all very much. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. Back on topic. To help make this feel like an X-Men game, each of the main characters can employ their iconic abilities to assist them in combat. Wolverine is an up-close brawler with retractable bitch claws, Cyclops and Gambit can get ranged attacks in, and Nightcrawler can utilise the teleportation ability that defines the character. Further feeding into the story from the comic books, when you give Wolverine a slow healing factor, if a player is to leave him in a quiet part of a level 1 interrupted, he'll regain his health. That's a steadfast commitment to the character, which was a rare element in video games at the time. With the concept settled and the danger room being capable of any number of worlds, players are set out to explore the world or skip much of it if you're Nightcrawler. Building on all of this, there are also other factors that add further variety to each character. Cyclops, as an example, can jump higher than other playable X-Men, and Wolverine has a great horizontal jump. Gambit has a somersault too, which can be taken advantage of. Before a playthrough, gamers are also given a choice of which difficulty level to select, choosing between amateur, hero and superhero. The problem is though, if you select amateur, X-Men only lets you play through half a game. This was an era whereby the get good or go home mentality in gaming was still considered cool, as making games super challenging was an easy way to inflate the playtime of an experience.
Get out. You don't even cut it.
The control and feel of this one is very solid indeed, particularly when we put it side by side with the Wolverine Adamantium Rage games, which we looked at a few weeks ago on here. Attacking enemies in this action side-scroller feels satisfying, with some great use of sound effects, meaning that when you make contact with opponents it feels more tangible. To put it simply, the controls are acceptably tactile. Despite solid controls, the game is still known notoriously as one of the most difficult games on the Sega Genesis, with a great deal of frustration unfolding for most players within the second half of this adventure. Eventually you get to a point where enemies and obstacles are everywhere, as well as projectiles that can hinder one's progress. To make matters worse, the number of pits in this game also results in a great deal of deaths. There is a range of hazards across this one that will challenge even the most seasoned players, but all of what I've mentioned isn't even the game's most infamous barrier, which I shall get on to covering soon. But for now, let's talk more about the individual stages that can be found in the game. Starting off, players are sent to the prehistoric Savage Land, the green jungles of savagery that can also be considered the home of Khazar, and Shana the She-Devil, although both are absent from this adventure. The pair of bosses, Juggernaut and Zaladane, have significant connections to the X-Men, although Zaladane actually has a connection to this world. Following this exploration of one of Earth's furthest reaches, the player character will then explore the Shia Empire, home of the boss character, Deathbird. The alien Shia Empire came into significant play during the Dark Phoenix saga, so fans of the comic books at this time would be well versed in this alien culture. Defeating Deathbird leads players to the Braddock/Excalibur Lighthouse, located on the shores of Cornwall in southwestern England in the real world beyond the Danger Room. A dimensional nexus that connects the Marvel Multiverse's Earth, characters such as the Excalibur team and various Captain Britons reside here. Players face off against Sabretooth, Juggernaut and Apocalypse. Past this detour to England, it leads the heroes to the future of Days of Future Past, facing off against Ahab, the leader of the Hound program that would hunt down and eradicate most of mutant kind in the future. Who knows how the Danger Room has a layout of a future that they're trying to avoid, but here it is. On top of all of this, how about travelling to Mojo's Crunch, the television broadcasting world of Mojo and home of Longshot, speaking of whom he sadly appears to be missing from this game. This title, which although known for its inventiveness and challenging difficulty, it did include another well-known factor which would frustrate gamers to no end back in the day. I am of course referring to perhaps video games' dumbest secret. What I'm about to talk about was confounding to many players in 1993, and even in the modern era of internet access and easy access to information, the feature I'm about to speak of still causes gamers problems, as this secret can be even more problematic when it comes to emulation efforts. Given that Sega's never released this title after its initial 16-bit affair, this means that for the best results, gaming historians are better off playing this one on aging original hardware. So getting to the point,
At last.
once a player defeats Mojo, the gluttonous television multiversal menace, you are prompted to reset the computer. While this makes sense in the narrative of the game, as a computer virus has plagued the X-Men's danger room, purging the virus by defeating Mojo and resetting the computer in the game would make the most sense, right? Well, the problem comes from the fact that there is no computer in-game or even actions a player can take to reset a computer. This left many gamers banging their heads against a wall, playthrough after playthrough, looking for this seemingly mythical location to progress. If you were a gamer at the time, you may have ran into this frustration, and players didn't have the ability to easily hop onto the internet and ask the question on progression. So what were gamers supposed to do? Well, basically, when it says reset the computer, the player is actually encouraged to reset the Sega Genesis or Megadrive in real life, using the old school reset button on the top of the console. But even if you were able to literally think outside of the box in this scenario, doing so still may have not been enough to carry on, as if you held the reset button down just a fraction too long, the game would be fully reset. Tapping the button just right, on the other hand, would effectively reset the system, but it would boot up some lines of code and purge the virus from the system, providing the player a means to proceed to Asteroid M and the final battle against Magneto, the Master of Magnet. This aspect also means that emulators had to account for this soft reset functionality, and players on the Sega Nomad could never beat the title, simply because of a lack of a reset button existing on this super cool handheld. Now, there are stories online of gamers playing the title on more modern systems like the Retron 5, which led to Hyperkin themselves just shrugging and saying, after looking into it for a bit, it seems like the Retron 5 is not able to do a soft reset. It seems like a lot of emulation program systems had this similar issue as well. We apologise for the inconvenience. Regards, Customer Service Representative. Thanks, random Customer Service Representative. This breaking of the fourth wall and asking players to perform an action in the real world would be far from the last moment like this in gaming, with a similar occurrence being executed much better in Metal Gear Solid in 1998. I am of course referring to the now legendary fight with Psycho Mantis, where the famous opponent proceeds to read the player in real life's mind by eerily telling them games they have been playing on recently. Such a function was achieved by reading the system's memory cards, and Psycho Mantis is able to read all of your moves by reading your controller inputs. Colonel Campbell actually tells you outright that to defeat him you should switch your controller into controller port 2, then he won't be able to read your mind. Metal Gear Solid would make it very clear to the player what needed to be done, which was essential considering how unconventional the action was that it wanted players to make. Now, if only Sega's X-Men had have been as intuitive as this Konami classic, then gamers wouldn't be moaning about the reset the computer moment 30 years after the game's initial release. This was certainly a situation where a developer tried to use a trick in the hardware to innovative effects, but unfortunately, it was just executed very poorly. The game has never been re-released, likely due to a mix of copyright issues and the general mehness of the title. But the mutant heroes would continue to make appearances on the Megadrive, including a direct sequel, X-Men 2 Clone Wars, a title that has been requested for me to look at on here a lot. So let me know down in the comments below if you're keen to watch an episode on that one. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and be sure to check out my video on the terrible Wolverine Adamantium Rage, a game that included a feature so ridiculous that you need to watch my video on it to now believe it. Yeah, cheerio.